Shemaya Croeso. We're very grateful to Dr. Toby Driver for giving this talk to us today. Bronze, glass and gold, fydd Gwydir ac Aur. Ni'n diolchgar iawn i Dr. Toby Driver o'r Comisiwn Brenhinol i siarad gyda ni heddi am wythnos archeoleg. It's great that he's still being able to do this for Archaeology Week. I'm Alice Briggs, I'm the Assistant Curator at Ceredigion Museum, and I just wanted to say a few words to introduce the talk. Mae gan Amgueddfa Ceredigion bartneriaeth hirsefydlog gyda Comisiwn Brenhinol ac rydym wedi elwan fawr o fod mor agos at ein swyddfa gofnodion hynafol a henesyddol yma yn Aberystwyth. Yn wir, fyddai ddim yma hebddo. Daeth fy nhad Dr Stephen Briggs yma yn ffres o Goleg Queen's Belfast yn y 70au i weithio yn y Comisiwn a byth wedi gadael. Ceredigion Museum has a long-running partnership with the Royal Commission, and we have hugely benefited from being in such close proximity to an ancient and historic records office here in Aberystwyth. Indeed, I wouldn't be here without it. My father, Dr Stephen Briggs, came here fresh from Queen's College Belfast in the 70s to work at the Commission and never left. Many fantastic artefacts have made their way to the museum through the work of the Commission, with recent acquisitions and displays in our archaeology gallery from Abu Magwr, for one. Behind the scenes, we've been working towards an exhibition, postponed for now until 2022, most likely, showcasing the treasures of Ceredigion. The museum is seeking loans from the British Museum, Ashmolean Museum and the National Museum Wales to be displayed alongside our own collection items. We're looking to highlight many of the new findings that Toby will talk about with you today and connect the objects back to the landscape and places from which they came. The exhibition will give us an opportunity to reflect on what real treasure is. A piece of gold jewellery, a pair of divination spoons, or are the objects special to us because of the memories that are caught up with them, the indefinable moments of song, laughter, and being together with those we love? Perhaps it is these intangible things that are all the more important to us today during lockdown. Whatever we hope to pass on into the future from our own lives, it is these objects and places that Toby is going to talk about that are the things that connect us to our ancestors. These objects and places help to build a picture of ways of life long gone and offer us a tantalising window into the past. Beth bynnag yr ydym yn gobeithio ei drosglwyddo yn y dyfodol o'n bywydau ein hunan, yr artefacts o'r lleoedd hyn y mae Toby yn mynd i siarad amdanat yw'r pethau sy'n ein cysylltu a'n cyndeidiau. Mae'r gwrthrychau a'r lleoedd hyn yn helpu i adeiladu darlun o ffyrdd o fyw wedi hen diflannu ac yn cynnig ffenestr gyfareddol i ni yn y gorffennol. Diolch. Thanks, Toby, and looking forward to hearing your talk.
Hello. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today about the prehistoric and Roman treasures from Ceredigion in bronze, glass and gold. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to explore how well connected the Ceredigion and Cardigan Bay regions were in prehistoric and Roman times through the great legacy of their archaeological treasures. We open on a wonderful aerial view of Cardigan Bay and Ceredigion from the north, looking here in the foreground on the Slas, middle distance down to Borth, and then all the way down the coast to Aberystwyth and beyond. And the beautiful clear sea of Cardigan Bay there on the right-hand side. Now, anybody who lives in the Ceredigion region or indeed visits here for holidays, when you come here, you very much feel you're at the end of the line, literally, with the railway line. It's a very remote region, a remote coastal region. You feel perhaps you're on the periphery of the British Isles. And communications here are difficult. It takes a long time to get out here to the west coast by road or rail nowadays. But how much was this the case in prehistory? And actually, if we look at some of the archaeological finds we have, they begin to speak of actually a very well connected region with a lot of cultures, a lot of people coming through it in the last 3,000 to 4,000 years. And perhaps our modern concepts of the connectivity of Ceredigion are misplaced. Now, so today I'm going to talk about 4 of the real amazing treasures from the region. And in sequence, we're going to talk first, upper left there, about the Bank Tyndall sun disk, an early Bronze Age find from Cymystwyth. Then upper right, we're going to talk about the Rosthrydd late Bronze Age shield. And then lower left, we're going to talk about the Penbryn late Iron Age spoons from Castithan Tonic. And then lower right, we're going to talk about the engraved Roman glass from the Roman villa at Abermagor. Now, we're very used to seeing north at the top of our maps nowadays. This reinforces our ideas of how isolated or how cut off parts of the west coast of Britain were in prehistory. And now, using the magic of Google Earth, we can twist the map around nowadays. And there's the Ceredigion region, the yellow oval in the center of the picture there. And we can actually see a very different view. We can see here now Ceredigion, West Wales, at the centre of this Irish Sea Mediterranean network, if you like, with the Irish Sea receiving in Atlantic traffic from the right-hand side, coming up through the peninsulas of Cornwall, the Pembrokeshire Peninsula, Llŷn Peninsula, up the Isle of Man and Dublin. And actually with this view, now you can see Kent and southeast England and Europe are actually quite far away from this vibrant international seaway. So it's an interesting new way to think about prehistoric routeways up the west coast of Britain. We also have the concepts of southwest Wales to challenge. In Ceredigion, we often think of ourselves as part of the old county of Dyfed, which was Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion. So we talk about the hill forts of southwest Wales or the archaeology of southwest Wales. But actually, if we look at this view, which ignores the north arrow again, we can see Ceredigion is central to this great arc of Pembrokeshire, the Llŷn Peninsula, Anglesey. And so journeys were possible in all directions, and particularly by sea. So what we're seeing here is evidence for a vibrant international seaway in prehistoric and Roman times. The main view here shows a rather imaginative reconstruction of the Iron Age promontory fort at St David's Head in Pembrokeshire, being rounded by a 1st century AD Roman-style vessel based on the Blackfriars ship from London. But we know there's good evidence for use of the Irish Sea seaways way back into prehistory. We had the Greek mariner Pytheas circumnavigating Britain in about 325 BC and stopping on the way and talking to cultures and learning about the prehistoric cultures he encountered there and writing those down in his later histories. The top right picture is the gold Broiter boat, a 1st century BC model of an Irish hidebound seagoing vessel found right in the north tip of Northern Ireland in Derry. And we can see it has seats, it had a mast, a steering rudder and oars. And this is a sort of small vessel we can imagine plying the seaways of the Irish Sea in prehistory between Wales and Ireland, potentially. And then the great anchor stock on the right there. This is the Porth Velin anchor stock. Now, this was found by sport divers in the 1970s off the southern tip of the Llŷn Peninsula, facing Bardsey Island. It's a 2nd or 1st century BC Mediterranean anchor stock, made of lead, and cast on the side are 4 lucky knuckle bones. It's a game of knuckle bones to give the sailors good luck. So either it's a lost anchor or it's a shipwreck. But this shows that Mediterranean ships were plying the seaways here 3,000, 2,000 years ago, and would have been a familiar sight to people living in prehistoric hill forts up the west coast of Wales. So these are things we have to bear in mind. Well, let's come to our first treasure, our first find, and look at the background to it. In the early and the middle Bronze Age in Ceredigion, we have the appearance of burials, single burials in barrows or round cairns or round mounds, both in the valleys of the county, in the river valleys, and also up in the hills. The main picture here shows a hilltop cairn at Moel Llyn, in the north of the county. There's a more modern cairn surmounting it. But we can imagine if we excavated this, we'd find perhaps a burial kist, a stone box, as we can see on the right at Groes Fawr there, where the body would be buried with an urn and some basic grave goods as well. But in the early Bronze Age period, 2,500 BC, 4,500 years ago, we have some incredible finds coming up from the county. Upper right, we can see 3 urns found in the lowlands of Ceredigion over the years. Far right is the Llanilla urn, unearthed in 1980 during construction of a housing estate on the Ystwyth Valley. And this can now be seen in the Bowen Gallery of the Ceredigion Museum. And it's a phenomenal urn, very, very large pot for a community to fire and then bury its dead in. And it's very poignant remains discovered in this urn. Remains, it's thought, of adolescents, a 7-year-old and possibly a 14-year-old, and then bones of a piglet's foot found in there. So we can only imagine the family story behind the burials in this urn. In the centre is a spectacular encrusted urn, one of the finest from Wales, discovered in a graveyard in Penllyn Chapel in Capel Bank in 1926 when they're grave digging. That's now in the National Museum Wales. And on the left there, an urn discovered in the 19th century at Penlan Isaf on the Ystwyth Valley, immortalised on a gravestone in Llanbadarn Vawr churchyard. But these hills, we have burial cairns, we have traces of Bronze Age activity. The hills of the Cambrian Mountains, main picture here near Trigorin, look empty today, but actually they're alive with archaeology and other finds. And a lot of these come from people visiting the region for the discovery of metals, early metals. Ceredigion, particularly North Ceredigion, has some of the earliest metal mines known in Britain. Now the main picture here shows the bare Cambrian Mountains, but in the centre of the frame is Castell Rivel, a circular hilltop enclosure, long thought to be perhaps an Iron Age hill fort, but actually it's very, very basically built. It encloses this bare dome in the mountains. It encloses a spring on this hilltop. It looks far more likely to be a possible Bronze Age hilltop meeting place, commanding these high mountain valleys. And in the valley below Castell Rivel, Groes Fawr, we have standing stones and cairns apparently marking a route through the hills. And upper right, we can see 2 standing stones at Pendam, marking the end of a long marked Bronze Age route from the coast at Penrhyn Coch up into the hills near Plynlimmon. And it's thought these may possibly be metal prospecting routes made by the early miners, leaving the hills and heading east to the lowlands of England. And it's in the Cymystwyth region, lower right, these deep valleys, that we have some of the best evidence for early Bronze Age mining. Now here we are from the air looking down on Copper Hill at the eastern edge of the Cymystwyth Valley. And the upper part of the photograph there shows these spoil tips around the Comet Lode open cast. Now 30 years of research by Simon Timberlake and the Early Mines Research Group pinpointed the traces of early Bronze Age mining here, worked around 2000 BC. And this was a very important discovery. We have surface workings, expanding then to deep open cast workings, looking for metals, works on a seasonal basis. The miners are bringing in these big river cobbles from the beaches and the rivers to break the rock. We're also using fire setting to break the rock open here as well. So this is a critically important hill in Ceredigion's prehistory, but it's the discovery made at the foot of this hill in October 2002 that interests us. In 2002, when the Early Mines Research Group were excavating a Roman and early medieval smelting floor, they came across this brilliant small gold disc. This is the Bank Tynthol Sun Disc. This is Wales's earliest known gold object. Absolutely incredible find. This was discovered in a disturbed Bronze Age grave. It wasn't even what the excavators were looking for. And it was discovered on this small tongue of land at the edge of the valley. So this is an impressive piece of gold work. It's about the size of an old milk bottle top. It's only one of 12 from Britain, and it's the first one discovered in Wales. Now we can see here, it looks as if a piece of alluvial gold has been hammered flat, and somebody's made 3 incised rings on this with small pinpricks around the edge. And then we have the 2 perforations at the center, which implies that the sun disk was sewn onto a garment. And it's likely that the person was buried with this on a cloak or some sort of garment in around 2400 BC. So this is an incredible gleam of light in the Bronze Age in Ceredigion, in these bare hills, for this exquisite object to be found. And where would you bury a person wearing this exquisite gold object? Just anywhere? Well, actually, it's the position, the location of this burial that's so interesting as well. Yes, it's at the foot of Copperhill Bronze Age mine, but it's in a very particular location in the Cymystwyth Valley. Now, this is a view out of a car window. I was a passenger in a taxi back in February. We had those great floods. Shrewsbury station was closed. The road was closed at Llangerig, and I found myself in a long taxi drive back to Aberystwyth down the Cymystwyth Valley. And this is where it strikes you. You're heading down this steep gorge, and at the foot of Copperhill is this huge alluvial fan of material extending out across the valley floor. You can see the road cuts through it. And it's on this prominent alluvial fan that the body was buried. It was buried laying west, looking down the valley towards the sea. So it's a very particular location for this small, precious gold disc. So the Banktinth sun disc was unearthed in the mud and the rain of Cymystwyth in October 2002, and now it can be seen preserved in a pristine fashion in St Fagan's National Museum of History down near Cardiff. So do go and look at it in the Wales Is gallery, along with some of the finest prehistoric gold that we have from the country. And you can appreciate a little bit more now about its place of discovery and the story behind its discovery. Now we move now from the early Bronze Age to the late Bronze Age for our second find, to about 1100 BC. And we're on the coastal plain near Aberystwyth now, at Rosrith, near Blaenploeth. And here you can see on the right this great bog just inland of the sea, photographed in the dry summer of 2018. Now, if you go to the British Museum and you arrive at the great museum doors and you walk up the stairs to the Prehistoric Brittain galleries, you see an exquisite bronze shield hanging on display. And this is a very impressive object. It's about 60 centimeters diameter, a fairly large shield. It has concentric ribs across its surface and around 3,700 bosses punched into its surface. But this isn't Roman, it's not Iron Age, it's a late Bronze Age shield, about 3,000 years old, and a hugely impressive piece of work. If you go to the Wikipedia page for Bronze Age Britain, this is the shield that illustrates the period that you first come to. And this is our local shield, really, from Ceredigion. This was discovered during peat cutting around 1804, and it's classed as a Yetholm type shield because there are 22 examples from Britain and Ireland of this type of shield. And in Yetholm in Scotland, 3 were found together, buried in a peat bog. And it's an incredibly rare shield. There's been a lot of research in the past by Stephen Briggs and Marion Uckelman to discover more about it. But there are only 3 from Wales, one from the slopes of Moel Shabod in Snowdonia, one from near Harlech on the west coast of Wales, and one from here from Blaenploeth, just south of Aberystwyth. Now, it hangs on prominent display in the British Museum, and I have to say there's a real buzz when you go and visit it, because tourists from around the world are looking at it and admiring it. It's in the context of Stonehenge and all the other great finds from Britain, and yet it's a local find pulled from a bog in Ceredigion. So it's really interesting to see it on display in London. Now, as I talk, you can read Marion Uckelman's statement here from 2012 about these shields, about how precious they were. Their limited numbers, fewer than 30 found in Britain in the last 2 centuries, and the huge amount of time-intensive skill to produce it. It's thought possibly all of these Yetholm type shields were produced at a single workshop by a single group of craftsmen. On the right, we can see how thin this shield is. It's remarkably fragile looking. Experiments in the 1950s with a copper copy of these types of shields suggested they were very fragile. They could be ripped apart by a Bronze Age sword. So it was thought they were actually quite a fragile ceremonial piece for display. But actually this more recent research suggests this bronze is very hard material, and some of these shields actually show signs of attack or sword points on them. So there's no reason to suggest this wasn't used in battle, but certainly it was probably a later rest in the Rosreith Bog as an act of ceremonial deposition. So we return to the bog. This is an air photograph. We have Blind Ployth village, lower right, Llanrusted up at the top of the picture. This bog just inland of the coast, it's a very concealed location, very hidden by hills around it. And perhaps this is one of the most sacred places we have in late Bronze Age Ceredigion. We can see a ground view upper right. Archaeologically, there's not been a lot of work to look at the context of the original find, but it's also quite a quiet area for visible archaeology. There's not a lot known around it. Upper right, we have a small circle there, a ring ditch, a plough-leveled barrow on the coastal plain near Rosreith. And then the main picture shows an interesting concentric circular enclosure on the coastal plain above the bog, which nominally it looks like an Iron Age enclosure, but it's always been an oddity. It's way out on its own. It's very perfectly concentric. And it may be this is an unusual Bronze Age enclosure associated with the deposition of the shield in the bog close by. It hasn't ever been investigated, but this would be an interesting site to do further work on. And we can see actually there's a promontory of rock, a promontory of soil feeding into the bog area, which has a crop mark ditch appearing in 2018. So maybe this promontory extending into the bog was part of the use of the bog, is perhaps where people went to deposit goods. Well, we can only imagine. But what an interesting find. And there's clues about potentially other sacred bogs or other sacred lakes now emerging in Ceredigion. In the 2018 drought over the natural lake of Maes Llyn on Cors Caron at the edge of Trigorin Bob, there's quite a few crop marks emerged. You can see them highlighted with yellow arrows here. Ditches, circular structures, a small square enclosure next to the lake at the top of the picture there. These may indicate prehistoric use of this natural lake, potentially in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age. And so these are all sites that we can look to do more investigation on in the future. Moving on with our remarkable, rare treasures from Ceredigion, we come to the third find, the Castithan Tonic or Penbryn spoons from the 1st century BC. And here we see in the dry summer of 2018, Castithan Tonic, the two concentric circles towards the middle of the frame, lower middle of the frame there. This is a hill fort in the south of Ceredigion, quite close to the sea at Penbryn. Now, South Ceredigion in the Iron Age was an interesting place. The Iron Age began around 700 BC, around the Roman conquest in about AD 70. And we have about 230 Iron Age hill forts and enclosures in the county. And you can see a map lower right here showing squares which are upstanding Iron Age hill forts, and orange circles which are hill forts which are being ploughed away, or Iron Age farms that are being ploughed away and are only visible now as crop marks. And there's a huge concentration of these sites in South Ceredigion bordering the Teivi River there. And Castithan Tonic is circled there. This is one of the last upstanding hill forts before we get down to these plough-level coastal plains of very high-grade agricultural land. Now, there's been a lot of work over the years in South Ceredigion. Upper right is the Fun on Wen Iron Age enclosure under excavation by the Dyfed Archaeological Trust. You can see the footings of a roundhouse there where a beautiful Iron Age glass bead was discovered. And lower left, we can see some of the incredible finds from the Llandyssil area, the pencoidifoil neck ring. Half of this survives. This is a digital reconstruction of how this Iron Age neck collar would have looked. This is an ornate lateen decorated late Iron Age or early Roman collar found at a hill fort at Pencoidifoil near Llandyssil. A real sign of wealth and power from the person wearing it. And in the centre is the Llandyssil stone head, unearthed sometime in the 1930s from a lost location, which looks to be of an Iron Age votive head from the Llandyssil Teivi Valley region. So there's some very interesting things happening in South Ceredigion in later prehistory. Now, Castithan Tonic, Christmas Castle in English, is an interesting site. On the right here, we can see an aerial photograph. It comprises an inner oval enclosure, a concentric outer enclosure, and then that bulge at the top right is this annex added to it. And we have the finds of these Iron Age spoons somewhere within the main enclosure in the 19th century, and then further finds of burial urns in that annex later in the 19th century. And it's located very close to the coast, where we have evidence of prehistoric trading. We have a gold Iron Age coin discovered here in the Pembrine parish about 300 years ago, and Roman finds on the beach at Aberporth. So it's probably a very well connected region here, with a lot of ideas and people visiting over the years. Now, this is a drone's view of Castithan from earlier this year. We're looking low over the concentric enclosures of this Iron Age hill fort. And we can see upper right these exquisite Iron Age spoons, bronze spoons with gold inlay, found in 1829, when the tenant farmer at Castithan was clearing a mound of stones from somewhere within the fort and discovered these two spoons. Now, these are bronze spoons in acidic Ceredigion soil. They wouldn't have survived if they were just buried in the earth. And we can probably owe their preservation to discovery in a burial and a charcoal ritual, alkali deposit for burial. And we know there's other spoons in Britain and France that have come from burials, and this is the most likely reason why they're so well preserved. Now, these spoons found their way to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and Reverend Barnwell, lower right, was a head teacher in Brittain High School, and he was just putting together a large new research paper about some very similar spoons discovered up near Brittain in the 19th century. And as his paper was in the printer's hands, he learnt about these new spoons in the Ashmolean and included them in his new paper. Now, these Iron Age spoons are incredibly rare still. We've had centuries of discovery, we've had decades of modern archaeology in the 20th century, and yet we only have 27 individual spoons known from Britain, Ireland, and one pair in northern France. So it's an incredibly rare find from the Iron Age. They're very interesting. They seem to be a particularly British artifact, though we do have some finds from Ireland. And it's likely they were linked to Druidical practices being practiced in Gaul and Britain in the later Iron Age period. Indeed, Julius Caesar ascribes the doctrine of the Druids as being something that originated in Britain. These spoons are found around Britain and Ireland, and they're often found in these identical pairs. You'll have one spoon with a cross-incised decoration on its base, and then the other spoon has an offset hole in its lower right surface there. And it's thought they were used as a pair, so the perforated spoon would be held above the cross-incised spoon, and then a liquid or a substance or a granular substance would be poured through that upper hole. And depending on where it landed on the lower quadrant, you'd be able to ask and answer questions. And it's thought that the inlays on the quarters, the four-part spoon below, may have indicated quarters of the lunar month or the year. We know from Roman and Greek writing about the Iron Age Druids and the religious practices that the ability to predict events and to tell auspicious and inauspicious days and months ahead was very powerful knowledge. And this was held by the religious elite. We can call them Druids. So it seems these are specialist divination tools, and this is the best explanation we have for what these spoons were used for. Now, our spoons from Pembrine are currently on display in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, and they're displayed within a sort of sacred grove setting, one above the other, showing this intended use of the spoons. And we have some very good copies that you can see in the Ceredigion Museum as well. But research by Andrew Fitzpatrick a few years ago discovered that the Pembrine spoons have this gold inlay in the upper left quadrant. And these are the only spoons to feature gold inlay of those known in Britain, Ireland, and northern France. So these are a fairly special pair of spoons. I'm doing new work now with Andrew Fitzpatrick to look at the spoons to develop a gazetteer and a typology for these spoons in Britain and Ireland. And these are 26 of the 27 spoons that we have. The 27th is just a fragment, so it's not illustrated. And you can see very plain spoons, upper left, lower left, almost mass-produced spoons with these circular handles. And then at the top center, the Pembrin spoons we have from Ceredigion. And look how decorative they are, how ornate they are, and how similar they are to the spoon from the River Thames in London, which is photographed on the top right there. This is now on display in the Museum of London. So we have a spoon from London looking very similar to our spoons from Ceredigion. So again, this speaks of a very well-connected community, or very well-connected communities in Iron Age Britain and Ireland. And a very interesting potential that at Castithan Tonic we have a religious specialist, potentially even a druid, practicing with these very rare religious tools. If we return to Castithan Tonic, we can see that it's an interesting site as well in terms of the amount of water and the number of springs we have around the site. We know that springs and bogs were very important in Iron Age societies for the deposition of prestige metalwork and for religious practices. And we can see upper left, this is one of the rock cut springs that survives within Castithan Tonic. It's been enlarged in later centuries to be used as a well, but it's a very big spring to find within an Iron Age hill fort. And then lower right with the arrow, this is a major spring head just near Castithan Tonic that begins near Temple Bar Farm and the river issues down towards Pembrin Beach. So there's a very interesting landscape context around this hill fort. Given the importance of the spoons from Castithan Tonic and the lack of modern research at the site as well, in the winter of 2020, the Royal Commission funded a new geophysical survey of the site to try and bring some understanding to the fine spot of these spoons. And the new geophysical survey by Seaway Survey, you can see lower right out there with their big geophysical cart in the winter, revealed all sorts of new things about the site. It showed that Castithan Tonic began as a concentric Iron Age enclosure with quite an open entrance on the east side in green. And then in blue, you can see the closure of that site with this great big annex. We have the springs inside the fort as well, but the biggest discovery from the survey has been the recognition of at least 5 new burial mounds we weren't aware of within and outside the enclosure. Typically, these would be Bronze Age burial mounds, but these ones at Castithan Tonic may actually hold Iron Age burials. It's difficult to say. And it may be that the big barrow we've discovered inside the fort, with that red arrow pointing at it, is the original location of those Pembrin spoons. That may be the disturbed grave that was dug up in the 19th century. So lots of new work to think about and lots to do. And with much thanks to the landowners at Temple Bar Farm, we're continuing with this program of new investigation and survey. Back in the spring, we were able to do a new drone survey of Castithan Tonic with permission from nearby Aberporth Airfield. And we're doing more work now to understand this very important site and the context of those spoon finds. Now to finish, we come to the Romans and we come to the Abermagwell Roman Villa for our last big Ceredigion treasure. Now here we have a wide aerial view of the Ystwyth Valley on a sunny day looking directly out towards Aberystwyth. You can see the hill of Pendennis in the distance. The star on the right marks the Abermagwell Roman Villa, discovered in 2010 through excavation or confirmed following a crop mark discovery in 2006, which showed this very unusual enclosure in the Ystwyth Valley. In the centre frame of the Ystwyth Valley, we have lots of woods. That's the site of a Roman fort at Trowscoid. Now, the Romans finally conquered West Wales about AD 70, and they established a network of Roman forts about every 15 miles. And the fort at Trowscoid was built about AD 70 and then abandoned about AD 130 when the area was pacified. The Roman villa didn't begin until about AD 230. It was built about AD 230. And it's thought the Roman villa actually used stone from the military bathhouse of the fort in its construction. So we found crop marks in 2006, which seemed to indicate a Roman villa. Ceredigion's first Roman villa. This would be a very unusual thing if it was confirmed. We did geophysical survey in 2009, and then Geoffrey Davis and I, with help from the Royal Commission and the Cambrian Archaeological Association, did 3 years of excavation to uncover this most rare site, still Ceredigon's only known Roman villa. The building we revealed is about 20 metres long. Lower right, you can see in yellow, marked out the building that survives under the farmer's field. It's about a 20-metre long building with projecting wings, and it has quite a rustic interior. On the left, we can see the central room of the villa under excavation with a clay floor. It would have had an open hearth in the kitchen, so a very smoky interior. But this is a technologically very advanced building for the region. It had deep stone foundations, requiring tons of material to be brought from the nearby River Ystwyth. And then it was finally roofed with local shale slates and a Ceredigon's earliest slated roof. And it required about 9,000 heavy shale slates on the roof to complete the building. You can see a reconstruction up in the centre there at the top of what this villa looked like. So a very, very interesting site for Ceredigion, and there must be more Roman villas out there. In the 14th of January in 2011, we were excavating the site, and Linda there in the white hat was digging in room 6 at the back of the building and pulled up some bits of ornate glassware. And we thought, well, this must be Roman glassware. It's extraordinary, highly decorated with this cut glass decoration. And this came from the corner of the rear room of the villa, which had actually seen a bit of disturbance from stone robbers in later history and sort of last couple of centuries. So there's a lot of modern rubbish like clay pipes and stuff in there. But we found nevertheless several fragments of this ornate glass vessel. So we're all very excited. You can see everybody crowding around. And we had our open day in July 2011, and we showed this Roman glassware to people. And a couple of people said, well, that's Georgian glass. You know, I've got a goblet at home that looks like that. I've got a Victorian sherry glass that looks like it. It can't be Roman. And we did actually begin to doubt it. And when we sent the Roman glass away to Professor Jenny Price later in 2011 for study, we left this ornate glass out of it. We thought it was probably post-medieval. It looked too good to be true. And Jenny Price said, no, please send everything to me. I want to have a look at everything. And so we sent away this cut glass to the professor to see what she said about it. And it was a remarkable answer that came back. This was Roman cut glass. This is of German origin on the Rhine Valley, a late Roman glassware, and an extraordinary find for rural mid-Wales at a Roman site. Now, upper right, that photograph of glassware, that's the British Museum's display of Roman glass. And the arrow shows the only cut glass vessel on display from Cambridgeshire. Roman cut glass is incredibly rare. It's not very common. And Professor Jennifer Price here on the right said that this vessel, vessel number 9 from Abermagor, was an extraordinary item of luxury. Its quality is vastly superior to the other glass at the villa, and indeed to virtually all the late Roman tablewares known in Wales. We can see on the left how this small glass vessel would have looked. It'd be about the size of a modern wine glass, but this exquisite cut glass decoration, cut with gem cutter's tools, on a glass blank, and then traded from Germany to Roman Britain. And then somehow this glass vessel found its way out to our Roman villa at Abermagor. So this is an extraordinary discovery for Ceredigion. The Roman glass from Abermagor is so extraordinary that in 2019 it made the coveted frontispiece of British Archaeology magazine, where the very best finds from around the country are shown each month in the first site. And it's a testament to the Roman Villa project and to the original people who occupied the villa that this ornate glassware has now more well known, or known on a United Kingdom basis really, and received this publicity. It was always a bit of a challenge to know how to display this in the Ceredigion Museum. And then some of me and some colleagues from the Royal Commission were lucky enough to see the London Mithraeum display in the spring of this year, in 2020, that's just been put together in central London. And lower right, you'll see a cut glass vessel discovered on the excavations of the London Mithraeum. Just about as many fragments as we have from Abermagor. but a novel display there with wire holding the pieces together to show how the vessel would have looked. And we're hoping now that we can get some funding to put the Abermagor vessel on a new display in the Ceredigion Museum. So this is something we have to look forward to now in the near future. So we're very pleased. That's my colleague Geoffrey Davis, who excavated the Roman villa with me. We're both looking relieved at the end of the 2015 season there, where the backfilling going on. Sad to see the Roman villa being infilled for the last time, but relieved that the archiving and the writing up could now begin. And we mounted a display of finds there in the Ceredigion Museum from the Roman villa. You can see parts of Ceredigion's earliest Roman roof there, lower left. And in the center, a Roman base silver coin of Severius Alexander from around AD 224. And this is from the Mint of Rome. So you can see a real Roman coin on display in Aberystwyth. And there on the right is Stuart before he retired, receiving in the Abermagor Villa archive to the museum. So that's all been wrapped up and published. And many of the stories, many of the finds I've talked about today, you can learn more about them in my 2016 book, The Hill Forts of Cardigan Bay, if you can find a copy. So we have 4 extraordinary treasures from Ceredigion, 4 treasures that really are famous and rare on a British basis. And I think we have to then realise that Ceredigion was quite a special region in prehistory, and a special region in Roman times as well. It was well connected to these vibrant international seaways. It was well connected to routes of overland transport and trade with the wider United Kingdom. And I think this shows us how much more there is to discover in the county. If I was talking in 2001, we wouldn't know about the Bankton Thol sun disk. If I was talking in 2010, we wouldn't know about the Roman glassware from Abermagor. And what else is there to find out there in the Ceredigion landscape? So that concludes the talk. I'd like to give my thanks to the many landowners over the years who've helped us work on their properties and their sites, and to the staff at the Ceredigion Museum as well, who've always been so helpful to the work and the research of the Royal Commission. And I urge you to go and see the collections there when you can. So many thanks. Diolch yn fawr.